I'm Paul Brady, I'm from Andrew. The biggest issue for this campaign, I think, is the future economy of this country, especially in keeping manufacturing in Australia. Probably the second biggest issue is the environment, not a credible environment policy.
Hey, I want to apologize up front if we run over a minute or so on this video. In fact, you may want to use the toilet or grab a drink or something, because if there's anything that defies putting into a 30-second soundbite, it's dealing with climate change. Complicating that is the fact that it's accidentally been my life's work in my professional career. Sure, I've spent a lot of time trying to keep people from getting injured or killed on the job as well, and I had to keep the lights on. But working on the nuts and bolts of climate change has always been what I'm about, and why the Australian Democrats are your best choice if you want to fix this problem. Way back in 1990, a few years after I started working as a chemical process engineer, almost literally I stumbled across an invention to eliminate 500 tons of volatile organic compound, or VOC emissions, which are powerful greenhouse gases, from the factory I worked at. Professionally, that invention was the peak of my career, and it's kind of been a downhill slide since then. But I have had a few successes. Now, because of the regulations that had me on that roof in Chicago way back then, when I arrived in Australia in 1992, as an immigrant, I had significant experience doing things called emissions inventories, which are complicated, boring studies that form the basis of scientifically verifiable reporting on emissions. I used this experience to provide my help through the consultation process with the government in the development of the National Pollution Inventory, or NPI, here in Australia, and I think it's done a lot of good. In my free time in the 1990s, I also developed a design specification, a working alpha, and a business plan to produce a piece of software to do emissions inventories far more efficiently than I could do them by hand. But that company failed to attract much interest during the dot-com bubble because it wasn't really that exciting to the big money men. Also back then, in 1999, I wrote my first discussion paper on the creation of a new commodity called the CO2 equivalent credit that could be traded like any other commodity can in a free market. My paper discussed the two means of establishing that market and the way to tie it to scientifically verifiable emissions inventories that would underpin the system. My paper went into the Australian Greenhouse Office, and it was also later published in a professional journal. Now, you know what? I don't know if anybody at the AGO even read my paper, and there were possibly dozens like it submitted at the same time. But what I do know is that what came out several years later in the form of the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting legislation and the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme that defined the emissions trading system looked a lot like my original proposal. Then by 2007, I was thinking we were finally beyond the debate over science itself, and we're on the verge of starting up the engine on one of the economic instruments defined in the Kyoto Protocol to make some real change in relation to anthropogenic CO2 emissions. To help encourage other companies to get involved in reducing their emissions, I then, at the request of the other directors in my company, led it to becoming the first HSE consultancy in Australia to be certified as carbon neutral under the old Greenhouse Friendly program. You know, just to prove that we wouldn't go out of business by doing the right thing. And we didn't. And 6 years later, we're still carbon neutral under the new system, the National Carbon Offset Standard. So my personal history with the science, engineering, and economics of climate change has led me to a point where I really should be optimistic about the future. But many days I'm not, and in fact I've become quite cynical sometimes about our chances of achieving success. See, the biggest challenges in taking real action on climate change aren't in the science that drives it, but in the motivation to do so. In December 2009, when we were so close to success after all that history I just described, the Greens banded together with the coalition to kill off the legislation for an emissions trading system in the Senate over what were some pretty petty demands at the time. That set the stage for Rudd's downfall on the mining tax, the rise of the Gillard government, the introduction of the carbon tax, and now the plans to repeal the carbon tax by the Abbott government, along with all the good work that went with it. It's a nearly impossible thing to do to make a man understand something when his economic well-being depends on him not understanding it. Overcoming the facts of our existing emissions, petty politics, and the resistance of those who are still tied to being energy inefficient and in the burning of the dirtiest of fuels for electricity is a nearly Herculean task, and I honestly don't know if we can do it, or in fact if it's too late. But let's assume it's not too late. Why don't we do something about it? What if we do some nation-building type projects to complete the boring work of upgrading our electricity transmission and distribution networks all over this country so that we could achieve energy efficiency and microgeneration capacity that will achieve 80% of the large target for reduction in emissions the scientists say is necessary? Because you know what? That's the truth. We can reach 80% of the large target for emissions reductions required with technology that's been in existence for 40 to 50 years. We just have to upgrade a lot of old crap, and it isn't going to be cheap. But what if I'm wrong? What if climate change really isn't all that bad? Or what if the temperature increases just sort of stop by themselves? Or what if it all just seems like a big waste of money? Well, the task before us is to do some nation-building projects that, even if the science of climate change were 100% wrong, would still be nation-building projects in any case. Wouldn't you want an electricity system that saved as much money on fuel as the one I'm describing? Wouldn't there also be some utility in a system that allowed distributed production of electricity, further increasing efficiency, providing self-generation capability, and a redundancy of supply that's inherent in that? Furthermore, wouldn't you want the jobs that would come along with a 10-year project to design, manufacture, install, and maintain the infrastructure I'm talking about? Something like $50 billion in new kit? Would that really be so goddamn bad? If that kind of future doesn't seem that bad, then I need you to do something about it, because I can't do it on my own. I need you to give a damn. Vote for the Democrats this election, and be brave enough to tell your friends to do the same. Seek us out after the election to see how you can do your tiny bit going forward to make sure that we have an Australian Democrat representing you in every parliament in the future. Place your vote and your confidence not in some pretender to the middle ground of logic and reason, or to a party that just sounds like it's for the environment. Give your vote to the most effective minor party in the history of Australia, and let's do something about making the world better. As always, vote Democrats, and thanks for your time.